everyone, and welcome to our bi-weekly virtual press call. May I ask everyone, as usual, to please mute your microphones. We will have a recording of this briefing available, which we will send you a link later on today. And we will also be providing further details in the press release during the later course of this afternoon. If you would like to pose a question, please enter it into the chat. And now with the hand-raising facility also there, you can use that. The questions can be posed in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we will respond in English, Spanish, or Portuñol. And with that, bueno, bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos de nuevo, de otra vez en nuestra conferencia de manera virtual. Antes de empezar, le puedo, por favor, pedir a todos que pongan sus micrófonos en mute. Si quieren hacer una pregunta, puede, por favor, utilizar el funcionamiento de chat. Las preguntas se pueden hacer, en inglés, español o en portugués. La presentación y la grabación lo vamos a compartir, como siempre, más tarde hoy. Además, hará un pequeño comunicado de prensa. E em português, bem-vindos a todos. Obrigado para a sua participação hoje. Antes de começar, peço a todos os participantes que coloquem seus microfones em modo silencioso. Se você gostaria de fazer uma pergunta, por favor, use a função da chat. Você pode fazer as perguntas em inglês, espanhol ou português. A resposta pode ser em inglês, espanhol ou portunhol. E a apresentação e a gravação serão disponível após da chamada. And with that, Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you very much for everyone to be on this call to provide the latest update on Latin America and Caribbean. As I've done in the past, I'll provide my opening comments in English, but then gladly take your questions in English or Spanish. And you can ask them also in Portuguese, and we'll respond in English, Spanish, or Portuñol. We'll do our best. On today's call, I would like to give you an overview on the following topics. One, the latest financial forecast and outlook. We made them public earlier this week. I also want to focus on some selected countries in our region where major issues are arising and where we are seeking government intervention. I'll also talk a little bit about the restart initiatives, which have been finalized under the auspices of ICAO. We now, as an industry, have global protocol measures to safely bring back air transport to the air. I'll also we'll talk a little bit also about air quality on board airplanes. I know that's always a major concern for passengers and for the media in terms of how safe and reliable is it to go on an airplane, particularly now with the virus, and then our stance on the quarantine measures. As always, we'll be very happy and glad to take your questions at the end. So let me start. Passenger demands in April, and these are revenue passenger kilometers, plunged by 94.3% compared to April of 2019, as the COVID-19 related travel restrictions have virtually shut down all of domestic and international air travel. For our region in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as North America, the drop was by 98.3% for all international traffic. And these rates of decline have never been seen in history of IATA's traffic series. However, April overall seems to have been the low point, with more recent figures showing that the daily flight totals rose 30% between April 21st and the 27th of May. even if most of this relates to domestic air travel in the various countries across the globe. With the many broad restrictions still in place across our region in Latin America and the Caribbean, as I mentioned previously, it is still our prediction that this region will be the last to recover from the crisis. Even with the tiniest light appearing at the end of the tunnel, 2020 will no doubt be the bleakest year in the history of our industry. Our current forecast predictions are that the industry will suffer a net loss of $84.3 billion for the year 2020. And even with the rise in revenues predicted for 2021, our forecast shows a net loss of $15.8 billion by year-end 2021. Airlines in Latin America and the Caribbean are expected to post a loss of $4 billion at the end of this year. That equates to a loss of $27 per passenger. That's down from the minimal 45 cents per passenger, which we had originally predicted for 2020. And this once again serves as a reminder why we are aggressively and proactively advocating for governments to provide final relief, or these financial reliefs. I do need to stress again that the airline industry in this region is on a life support at present. And again, I emphasize life support. And that we need governments to stop delaying decisions on providing the necessary financial aid. Without this, there will be no local aviation industry left which will need to be playing an essential role in the recovery phases. And with this, let us take a look at the developments across our region. Looking at Argentina, we thank the Argentinian stakeholders in that country for taking the decision to allow the deferment of payments for overflight and terminal navigation fees. This measure will certainly help with the planned restart of domestic flights that we hope will take place in Argentina in July, with the resumption of international service as of September. In Mexico, one of the few countries that never fully ceased operations, Mexico City's International Airport has agreed to waive and discount airport usage fees, which will help financially as service is gradually increased at that city. We also welcome the decision to abandon the construction of Terminal 3 at this time, which would not have brought about any relevant operational efficiencies. Time and money can be better spent on developing long-term solutions for airport capacity at the new metropolitan airport system during the time traffic levels recover over the coming years. Meanwhile, Antigua became the first island in the Caribbean to open international arrivals, and while other islands are planning to follow this, the issue of COVID-19 testing prior to arrival will be complicating travel. While IATA and the industry supports testing, this needs to be scalable, accurate with fast availability of results, and this, however, is yet to be the case at present. Ecuador is a further case in point. While the country has opened Quito Airport for international arrivals, even those passengers can present a negative COVID test must quarantine for 14 days, which shows mixing and confusing where you take a test but you still have to quarantine in the country for an extended period of time. Even though the Colombian government was one of the first ones to provide financial relief, the airlines are very anxious awaiting a decision on the government-backed loans to shore up their liquidity. Further uncertainty has been created by the lack of clear plan to allow the resumption of domestic air travel. And while airlines are ready to resume services following the ICAO issued guidelines, confusion exists on who is granting the final approval on a government side. The decision cannot be passed between government entities, mayors, and other stakeholders like a hot potato. And putting a piloto in place in Colombia, we do not feel is the right suit to pursue at this time when we have seen other countries successfully open their air transport services in a responsible and manageable way. Another country we really need to highlight is Panama. Considering it is the hub airport, its hub airport offers connections to nearly 90 international destinations before COVID-19. The air transport supports nearly 250,000 jobs. And it is astonishing to the industry that to the date, the government has not taken any firm steps to provide tangible relief to the industry. We understand that the government wishes to tread carefully. However, other countries with hubs that are direct competitors to Panama have already offered relief measures to the industry. If Panama wants to defend its air connectivity and the economic benefit that this provides, relief measures are urgently needed. Along similar lines, we're still waiting for the government in Chile to provide financial support to airlines. And moving to Peru, here the situation can be summed up as follows. Financial relief is urgently required, while the restart of operations of July needs to take place. On relief measures, the government has agreed to analyze requirements and develop a plan to define the financial response. A swift solution to enabling financing through state guarantees, credit lines must be found to ensure that further airlines do not cease to exist. In order to allow for domestic flights as of July 1st, airlines urgently need the government to announce the health protocol under which operations can resume. However, the task should have been made a lot easier by last week's approval of takeoff, which is a guidance for air travel through the COVID-19 public health crisis by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. It is an authoritative and comprehensive framework of risk-based temporary measures for air transport operations during COVID-19 crisis. It proposes a phased approach to restarting aviation and identifies a set of generally applicable risk-based measures. In line with recommendations and guidance from the public health authorities, these will mitigate the risk of transmissions of COVID-19 viruses during the travel process. Takeoff was one element of work undertaken by the ICAO COVID-19 Aviation Recovery Task Force, CART. The CART report to the ICAO Council highlighted that it is paramount importance to avoid a global patchwork of incompatible aviation health safety measures. It urges ICAO states to implement globally and regionally harmonized, mutually accepted measures that do not create undue economic burdens or compromises safety and security of civil aviation. Along the same lines, we this week presented to the Organization of American States, OAS, highlighting that the industry needs on COVID and laying the groundwork for future inclusion of air transport agenda at OAS summits. Before taking questions, I would like to pass the word to two of my colleagues, Jose Ruiz Llorente, who is our Regional Director for Safety and Flight Operations for the Americas and is an airline captain. He'll provide a bit of insight on the air quality and air conditioning systems on board our aircraft. And now Alejandro Restrepo, who many of you already know, our Manager Security and Facilitation for the Americas, who will provide some additional insight on our stance on quarantine measures. So I'll pass it on to Captain Jose Ruiz.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, everybody. So there's been a lot of talking and writing about the quality of air inside aircraft over the past months. So let me start with a very quick comparison that we can all visualize and relate. The quality inside an airplane a modern airplane. We don't have to go like state-of-the-art, brand new. We're talking about airplanes for the past 25 years. The quality of air inside an airplane is equivalent to the quality of air of an operating room in any hospital. They have the same standards and they use the same HEPA filters. We'll get into the HEPA filters that you can see there on this slide really quick. How do aircraft manufacturers achieve these? Well, just a quick review. 50% of the air that gets into the cabin of an airplane comes from outside intakes. And the other 50% comes from already filtered, recirculated air that has already gone once through those HEPA filters. They get together in a mixing unit and get distributed about the cabin. Now, with this method, what we achieve is that the air in an airplane gets exchanged completely every 2 to 3 minutes. Now, let's just stop there for a second on those numbers that you see on the slide. They talk about those HEPA filters. HEPA, it means high efficiency particulate air, and they are very efficient, and therefore the name. Overall, they are capable of trapping 99.97% of any particle that is in the air. Now, if we move that to bacteria, virus, or fungi, their efficiency goes up to almost 100%, so 99.993. And they're also very efficient because they're capable of trapping up to particles up to 0.03 micron. And I'd like you to stay with that number for just a second, because in this case, size do matter. When we're talking about the viruses like the COVID-19, we do have the size of previous virus, even COVID virus. And the size of those viruses, they range between 0.1 micron, 0.08, 0.13. So as you can see, they're much bigger size, especially when they are within the droplet, than the HEPA filter are capable of trapping. So I'm going to stop right there. I think it's just an overview, and of course, I'll be more than happy to take any questions in the end. Thank you, Peter. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Alejandro?
Sure, I will continue. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jose. So today, I'll be providing some additional insight on industry's position in relation to the use of face masks. I will also be talking about the implementation of COVID-19 testing. And lastly, I'll mention some our position in relation to quarantine measures imposed by states and the effect that these have in the resumption of operations. So to begin with the face masks, let me just reiterate that we in IATA are fully supportive of passengers wearing the face masks at all times throughout the entire travel journey, as part of the multi-layered approach that we've covered before in order to reduce the risk of transmission. Passengers should be responsible to carry and show up at the airport of origin with their own masks and wear them at all times, inclusively during the flight. However, we do not encourage governments imposing passengers to wear a specific type of mask, especially those that should be reserved for healthcare professionals or other type of special masks that might prove difficult to find. Next slide, please. In relation to the COVID testing requirements, our position is very clear in the sense that an effective test could add value as an additional layer of protection, potentially giving the governments the confidence to reopen their borders and or remove other more disruptive layers of protection, for example, the physical distancing on board the aircraft. A COVID-19 test must meet 4 criteria for it to be useful and effective. The first one is to deliver quick results, particularly if the test would be done at the point of care, for example, on arrival at the airport facility. Secondly, the test should be carried at a scalable manner. They should be scalable. Third, the test results should offer high levels of reliability, and this is key to avoid false negatives, which means passengers that carry the virus and that are missed, or those false positives, which are healthy passengers who flag as positive and who require additional screening and isolation, who then are denied boarding and require rebooking, etc. And lastly, the test should be cost-effective or reasonably priced, especially for those exceptional voluntary tests that are charged to the passenger. Primarily, all testing costs should be borne by the governments if implemented. So, as you are aware, technology is evolving rapidly, and as of this moment, we are not aware of any tests in the market that meet all of these 4 criteria mentioned before. Even without a test being ready that meets all the criteria that I mentioned, there are also other operational issues at play that need to be considered. For example, who is the responsible entity to carry out the test? As I said, it should be the local authority, the local health authority, and not the airline who is responsible to perform these testings. Secondly, who should cover the cost? It should be the government and not the airline or the passenger. And the responsible entity for conveying that results, or those results, of the test, the information should flow between the passenger and the government exclusively. Lastly, there have been also some concerning developments where the results of tests carried on arrival have been used to remove the right to offer service to the carriers. We believe that this punishment that airlines are facing is clearly a worrying trend and should not be accepted in any case. And moving on to the next slide on quarantine, as I mentioned again, the proposed and agreed multi-layered approach that we put forward in the IATA roadmap and that has been endorsed now by ICAO includes a row of measures which should make the imposition of general quarantine measures unnecessary. Temperature screening, for example, on departure reduces that risk of symptomatic passengers arriving at the airport and traveling. We estimate that imposing quarantine measures equals to keeping the borders closed and the industry grounded. And this could obviously act as a deterrent for travel. Economic studies have also shown that countries that have put in place quarantine requirements have experienced similar drop in traffic to countries with full travel bans in place. Alternative solutions to the quarantine may include, for example, the mandatory submission of health declaration forms, ideally by electronic means, and the contact tracing or submission of passenger contact data for tracing purposes that will help reduce the risk of imported cases developing into local chains of transmission. With this, I end. Thank you, and back to you, Peter.
Alejandro, thank you very much. And for everyone on the call, both Jose and Alejandro will be available for questions afterward. And in closing, please again, let me renew my call to our governments in the region to provide the requested financial support to the airlines now. The word now is so urgent. The industry is operating on a life support, but we cannot do this for much longer. It is therefore essential that aviation is allowed to resume operations along the ICAO CART takeoff guidelines, and therefore the governments need to implement these without delays. While we understand the measures that governments have taken to protect their citizens during this public health crisis, we need to learn to live with COVID-19. We will need to coexist with the virus until a vaccine is made available. The industry has worked on the necessary measures to resume flight operations in the safest possible manner under the present circumstances, and therefore we must find a cooperative way that will allow the industry to restart. Airlines in the region suspended operations since late March. We cannot afford to remain grounded for an additional month or two. If this happens, the grounding could be permanent. Just as we're learning how to live safely with the virus, we can be trusted to travel responsibly. We have implemented extensive measures to ensure health and safety in our operations. Remember, Our sector, air transport, figured it out in the past. After 9/11, after SARS. Governments need to give confidence to air travel, to air transport, to be able to commence flight operations as soon as possible. With that, thank you very much, and we are open for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter, thank you, Jose Ruiz, and thank you, Alejandro. And we'll now go to the questions, and we'll start with a rather lengthy one from Argentina, but I think I can just summarize it. It basically asks our comment on the restart of domestic services, the planned restart of international services, and the cooperation we've had with the Argentinian government recently. So over to you, Peter, and if we could have the response in English and in Spanish, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with regards to Argentina, we are having regular conversations with the Argentinian government. Is almost on a weekly basis. They have been very open, very forefront in conveying the information, in working with the industry. They know what our requests are, and I've mentioned them in this group many times. One is a restart that is effective, implementing the right protocols. Two, permitting airlines to go back to the air as soon as possible. And three, the financial aid for the industry. We are somewhat confident. We're hopeful that domestic services will be able to begin what we hope in July. We hope it'll be a little bit sooner, but right now the expectation is sometime in July. We obviously know the September date is for international traffic. We have been speaking to the government, and hopefully we may be able to find some route segments in which we can begin air travel before that. So looking at some corridors between Argentina and other countries, either North America or Europe, permitting that the right protocols are in place between both countries. So that is something that we are working with the authorities, that we're encouraging the authorities to follow. I'll say in Spanish, nuestras reuniones o nuestra comunicación con el gobierno argentino ha sido muy regular, muy bueno, muy positivo. Hemos tenido reuniones telefónicas prácticamente una vez por semana. Hemos continuado enfocando en los tres temas que hemos desde el inicio. Uno es la reactivación de los vuelos internacionales y domésticos, asegurar que los protocolos o el restart, la reactivación tenga los protocolos adecuados y la ayuda financiera que puede aportar el gobierno. Obviamente estamos trabajando en estos momentos para asegurarnos que los protocolos van a estar ya implementados para el país, para el transporte aéreo. Estamos también trabajando con las autoridades para ver cuándo podemos empezar las operaciones domésticas entre las provincias. Esperemos que sean lo más tardar en el mes de julio. Sabemos que la reactivación para los vuelos regulares internacionales es a partir de septiembre, aunque hay una posibilidad que podamos establecer corredores entre distintos países, con la Argentina, pues posiblemente algunos de Norteamérica, en Europa, donde nos permita establecer esos vuelos antes de la fecha fijada del 1 de septiembre. Pero hasta el momento el diálogo es abierto, transparente y muy cooperativo.
Thank you, Peter. Bueno, gracias. Ya vamos a pasar a una pregunta en español de Panamá. Por favor, ¿pueden hablar un poquito más sobre la situación en Panamá? Había ya reuniones con el gobierno, las pérdidas y, bueno, la situación general para la aviación en Panamá, y en español, por favor, y después un comentario rápido en inglés. So this is mainly on the current situation in Panama.
Okay. Bueno, todos ustedes saben que IATA, la industria, siempre ha puesto a Panamá como uno de los líderes a nivel de transporte aéreo a nivel global, no solo regional. En los años se ha trabajado muy bien con el gobierno panameño, con el sector de transporte aéreo en Panamá, que ha posicionado al país en una posición muy privilegiada. Una línea ya fuerte, un aeropuerto hub con una conectividad muy buena y un gobierno que siempre ha visto a la industria como un socio estratégico de la nación. Desafortunadamente en estos momentos es uno de los pocos países de la región que todavía no ha aportado ningún tipo de ayuda financiera a la industria, considerando la importancia que tiene el transporte aéreo en el país. Hemos mantenido reuniones regulares con las autoridades panameñas, pero hasta el momento no hemos visto el impacto o si vemos la contribución que da la aviación al país, es casi el 14% del PIB, y desafortunadamente no estamos viendo el aporte necesario. En los primeros 6 meses hemos visto que el impacto de ingresos ha sido de 800 millones de dólares comparado al 2019. Ahora con las extensiones de cierre del país todavía más tiempo, da más preocupación. Y aquí lo que necesitamos en Panamá, que ya empiecen a identificar cuándo se va a poder reactivar los vuelos desde Panamá y hacia Panamá, sobre todo que hoy en día ya tenemos los protocolos que han establecido la OACI para poder llevarlo a cabo. ¿Qué pasa si no se hace? ¿Qué pasa si no tenemos el aporte financiero que se necesita? Pone en riesgo la competitividad del aeropuerto de Panamá, eso sin duda, sobre todo cuando hay otros aeropuertos que compiten con Panamá, que están poniendo las medidas, que están ayudando, y pone en desventaja a las líneas aéreas que están basadas allí y que operan al país. Y por eso hemos hecho este llamamiento en el día de hoy, de la importancia, como ha hecho en el pasado el gobierno panameño, de ser un líder y siempre estar en el liderazgo regional. Esperamos que tomen el mismo liderazgo que han tomado en el pasado y ayuden a la industria durante este tiempo, para asegurarnos que cuando se reactiven los vuelos, la industria esté en una situación que pueda ayudar a la economía panameña y a los ciudadanos panameños mantener esa conectividad que han tenido y han podido disfrutar en los años pasados. I'll say very quickly, Panama has always been a country that both IATA and the industry had always maintained a very positive impression because of its proactive air transport agenda, with a strong airline, strong hub, strong connectivity base. We've always compared it with the leading aviation nations around the world. However, in this time of need, in this time of crisis, they are not taking the leadership role like those other countries that we have compared it to in the past have. And what is happening, Panama is putting itself at risk to continue being a strategic hub for the region, particularly when other hub airports, other governments in neighboring countries are providing the financial support to the industry during this difficult and challenging times. And we call on the Panamanian government to do what other nations have done, to do what they have done in the past, to take that leadership role and help the industry so the industry can help the Panamanian government when it reopens, and we hope it needs to reopen soon so we can bring social well-being to its Panamanian citizens, and we can ensure and guarantee the connectivity that Panama has enjoyed will be maintained after the crisis.
Thank you. So let's go to a question which is slightly broader. It covers all of Latin America. I'll read it in Spanish. I think we should also have the answer in English for those who don't understand Spanish, as it's a regional one. ¿Qué efecto está teniendo la pandemia en la conectividad aérea en América Latina y en el turismo? ¿Está la situación de conectividad más crítica en Sudamérica? So this is about the effect the COVID-19 crisis and the grounding is having on connectivity to and from Latin America and also on the tourism industry.
Okay. el COVID está teniendo un impacto significativo en lo que es la conectividad y la industria en sí. La mayoría de los países de América Latina implementaron restricciones o cierre de fronteras a mediados de marzo, prácticamente al mismo tiempo o muy cercano a esos tiempos que se llevaron a cabo en Europa y en Norteamérica. Hoy estamos viendo que Asia, Europa y Norteamérica están reactivando el sector. Sus economías poco a poco se están abriendo. Ya se han anunciado en España, Inglaterra, Estados Unidos y en Asia. Contrario a lo que está ocurriendo en América Latina. En estos momentos el epicentro de la pandemia se encuentra en nuestra región. Nuestras economías, nuestros países se mantienen cerrados y los pronósticos, si tenemos suerte, algunos de los países, esperamos la mayoría, abrirán sus vuelos domésticos a partir de julio y poco tiempo después los vuelos internacionales. Eso va a poner casi 4 meses, en algunos casos 5 meses, en que el sector del transporte aéreo ha estado prácticamente parado. Y en estos momentos nos encontramos en un 93% de los vuelos regulares que se mantienen en tierra. Eso pone a la región en una tremenda desventaja, tanto para el sector como para las economías de nuestros países. Y por eso, ahora que tenemos los protocolos necesarios para asegurar que el transporte aéreo se pueda reactivar de una manera responsable y segura, que los gobiernos están ya manejando las medidas a nivel local para sus ciudadanos y algunos países ya poco a poco están reabriendo sus economías, es fundamental que los gobiernos poco a poco nos empiecen a dar más libertad para abrir el transporte aéreo. Lo que no podemos hacer es implementar medidas con cuarentenas o planes pilotos que no permiten reactivar de una manera responsable. Y por eso nos encontramos en una desventaja, por eso las líneas aéreas en esta región se encuentran en una situación mucho más delicada que la mayoría de las otras compañías en otras regiones. I'll switch it very quickly to English. The situation in Latin America for travel and tourism, as the question was posed, we are at a critical crossroad for our region. Most of our governments implemented country restrictions or closure of the borders almost at the same time as most of the countries in Europe and North America did back in March. The difference is the economies of the countries in Europe, North America, and Asia are now opening the borders, are permitting airlines to go back into the Europe. In our region, most of our borders remain closed. By the time they are open, we will have gone through a process of almost 4 or 5 months in which 90+% of our operations have been on the ground. In a region that is already very, very challenging for the air transport industry to succeed. This is a time for governments in this region, with the protocols that have been put on the table by ICAO, to be able to open its borders to permit airlines to recommence air travel. The airlines, the air travel industry, the airports have the protocols to ensure that we will be able to transport passengers in a safe manner. If we do not do this, we can expect many more airlines to not be in a position that they will be able to open by the time the government will open. So, as we have done in the past, and this industry has learned from 9/11, SARS, we can put and implement measures that will safeguard health and safety in the operations and in the transportation of our passengers. But we are, as I mentioned in my opening remark, the industry is on a lifeline. And if you don't have the air travel sector supporting the economic recovery, you don't have hotels, you don't have restaurants, you don't have commerce moving into and out of our countries. So there is a huge risk.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So with that, we'll go to a question in English, and I guess this is for Peter with probably support from Alejandro. And it pertains to passengers wearing masks on board aircraft. Are there any protocols in place that regulate how masks can be removed for eating and drinking during the flight, especially for long-haul travel?
I'll let our expert answer that one.
Thank you. So in relation to the protocols for the removal of masks, that basically depends on the airline. If they are providing onboard service, yes, passengers may remove the masks for eating and or drinking only at that time, and they must wear it again once they're finished eating.
Okay. Bueno, la pregunta fue que si hay un protocolo a bordo que se refiere al portamiento de las mascarillas durante el tiempo que sea cuando se sirven a, no sé, a beber o a comer, ¿no? Entonces... Claro,
la aerolínea misma establece ese, digamos, o instruye al pasajero en el momento del abordaje o durante el perifoneo del mensaje a bordo y les indica